just do a quick review here. Who remembers? Miss McDuff. Who has her calculator? Yes. How do we do that?
You hit y equals.
Yep, we hit y equals. She's guiding us through the steps. And always remember, if there's something already in there, just hit clear and that will take it out.
And then you put the equation.
And when I put in, how do I get the x, Taylor?
It's the variables.
It's my variable button, right? Which is right there. Good. Now, I can't remember if we talked about it in this class yesterday, if it was a different class. This is what I see when I draw a picture of this. This is what I see on my screen. Now, that is not the whole picture. I mean, obviously, there's a piece of the parabola that I'm not seeing, right? But does it matter to me? No, because when I'm solving, where are my beady little eyes focused? Right here and right here, right? Now, can this side, this chunk of people right here, can you guys find this root for me? You guys? And all the rest of you over there, would you find that root for me? Now, of course, you can't participate in this if you don't have a calculator. So I will say one more time, we need a drop-in calculator. Do I need to go through the steps, or does Taylor need to go through the steps, or you guys remember? You remember? If you have forgotten, find somebody who has a calculator that can help you.
It's supposed to be all the way over there.
Which one are you looking for?
Hold on. How do you find it?
It tells you what it is. It's what X is made of.
Oh, so oh, we need
I'll sit here right now. Yeah. Anybody get negative 6.14 over here? And anybody get 1.14 over there? Okay, good. So those are our two solutions. What was this?
not like one of them. No one is listening to you. I actually was listening to her.
Now, so we would say that the answer to the question is x equals negative 6.14 or x equals 1.14. Those are the two answers to the question. If you are still struggling with that, you need to get in here before school and we'll take a look at it. Now we need to get our note sheets out because we're going to solve some of the same equations using a different strategy. quadratic equations can be solved in lots of different ways. My job is to help you learn all the different ways. Because sometimes one way is a whole lot faster than another way. This problem can be solved lots of different ways, but the fastest way to solve this problem, anybody want to take a guess? Actually, the graphing calculator is not the fastest way. Could I do this on my graphing calculator? Absolutely. Square root both sides. But probably before I square rooted both sides, I might want to divide by 4. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. All right. What do I get when I take the square root of x squared? X. What do I get when I take the square root of 25 fourths? The square root of 25 fourths. What do I get? 5 over 2.
Why does 2.5 work?
2.5 is the same thing. Now, kids, there's one little thing you forgot. Austin,
Sorry.
you play football, right? Okay. What does Coach Strife do at practice if you fall asleep?
Well, you usually don't fall asleep.
I know, but what would he do? Let's anticipate. Let's suppose it's football practice and you fall asleep.
Probably wrong.
Probably, yeah. Whatever it is, it wouldn't be good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is no different.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, so we're going to take the square root, and kids, it's got to be plus or minus. Every quadratic equation is going to have 2 answers. And the only way you're going to get the 2 answers is to take plus or minus the square root. You guys are devastating my self-esteem. He's sleeping, you're nodding, or yawning, as though, like what I'm saying is not important.
It is.
Or I'm not excited.
You are.
Square root is 25 fourths, plus or minus 5 halves. All right, let's try the next one. Do not be afraid of it, kids. It looks hard. It is so simple. Take the square root of both sides. What is the square root of something squared? Just itself. So this would be just x minus 3, right? You don't have to FOIL it, you don't have to do anything. You're just taking the square root of x minus 3 squared. Now what am I going to put over here? Not 5, plus or minus 5. One more time, you've got to do plus or minus when you take the square root of your number. So this is really 2 equations now. It says x minus 3 equals 5, and it says x minus 3 equals negative 5. Would you agree with that? Remember, quadratic equations, squared equations, equations with squares, have to have 2 answers. And the only way you're going to get the 2 answers is to break this apart into these 2 separate equations because of that plus or minus. So x equals 8, or x equals negative 2. And there are our answers. All right, let's try the next one. Any ideas? Look at the next one. Do you have a thought on maybe how we would start that? I've heard lots of options. I heard somebody over here said divide by 3. Somebody else said distribute. Somebody else said take the square root. Now, all of those things are fine. But there's one that's going to make our life easier and it's going to make problem solving faster. So of those options, divide by 3, take the square root, distribute. And by distribute, we have to FOIL first and then distribute. Which do you think might be the fastest, most efficient way of doing the problem?
Square root.
Almost. Divide by 3 first. And the reason, Moses, that I want to divide by 3
Oh,
first.
there's a, I didn't say there's a 3 there.
Yeah, I gotta get rid of that 3. So I'm gonna divide both sides by 3 first. Is everybody okay with that? Now I'm going to square root both sides. Now some of you at this moment are having a little bit of palpitation because that's not a perfect square. This one was a perfect square, this one was a perfect square, this isn't a perfect square. You're right, it's not. Tough toenails, we move on, I mean we have to deal with it. So what does this say now when I've taken the square root of both sides? X minus 4 equals, watch it, plus or minus the square root of 3. So, yeah, I can't do anything with the square root of 3. I'm just going to leave it the square root of 3. And then x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 3. Is that 2 answers? Yes. 4 plus the square root of 3, 4 minus the square root of 3. You can separate them if you want. I never do. I just leave them together because I can't simplify that. So I might as well just leave it like this. I do not want you typing that into your calculator and giving me some rounded off decimal. This is the answer. That wasn't so bad. All right, how about the next one? How do you think we're going to do this one? Square root. That's exactly right. Ms. Hedges, that's exactly right. So we're going to take the square root of both sides, and what will we have when we take the square root of both sides? 2x plus 1 equals plus or minus 4. So you have 2 equations to solve. 2x plus 1 equals 4, and 2x plus 1 equals negative 4. So 2x equals 3 and x equals 3 halves, or 1.5 Moses. 2x plus 1 equals negative 5, or 2x, excuse me, equals negative 5, and x equals negative 5 halves. So here are our 2 answers to your problem. You all right with that? Now, when are we going to use this kind of, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Would you use that method? Let's look at the next problem on the sheet 3A. Would you be taking the square root of both sides of that thing? No. When do you want to take the square root of both sides? When you have squares, right? When you have something squared, it makes sense to square root it to undo the squaring. Here, you don't have a quantity squared. You got a squared in the problem, but not a quantity squared. So this problem's going to require us to do a different method. Could I graph this on my calculator? Absolutely, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to use a method called completing the square. Do you remember doing this last year?
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about the process? Like how to start? Lindsay? Now, does that problem factor? It does. Could I solve the problem by factoring? I could, but the directions say complete the square, which is a different method than factoring. Factoring would look like this. So then I would set these equal to 0, and my answers are 7 and negative 1. Now, that procedure is solving by factoring. I wasn't kidding when I said there's lots of ways to solve this problem. You could graph it. You could factor it. There are other things you could do. But right now we're talking about a process called completing the square. And I need your thoughts on that. Jamal?
You square the last number.
Things are fitting together in your head and you're kind of thinking about it. That's not quite right. Lindsay, we'll try again.
Okay, is it, when you would add the 7, but you would also divide, x by 2?
Yeah, she's got it, she remembers. And Jamal, you had part of that. You had the squaring part, but you were squaring the wrong thing. So, yes, we're kind of vaguely remembering it. So, here's how it works. Step 1, if you are completing the square, step 1, move this number to the other side. And the reason we move that number to the other side is because we have to make room right here for a new number that will make this a perfect square. That's why it's called completing the square. So we have to figure out what we can put here so that this will factor into a perfect square. And Lindsay said it. Did anybody hear her? How do we find that number? It's real easy. You take half of this. So half of 6 is 3. And then you square it. So that's what we square, Jamal. We take half of this number and we square it. So half of 6 is 3, and 3 squared is 9. And don't forget to add it to both sides. Okay? Now, this had better factor into a perfect square. Can anybody tell me what that is? It'll be x minus 3. It's x minus 3. That's how I get those numbers. X minus 3 equals 16. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Except for all the lines, extra lines I drew in there. Does that look like the problems we just did? Now I have my square, right? So what do you think I'm going to do now? Square root both sides. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus 4. So x minus 3 equals 4, and x minus 3 equals negative 4. So what does this one say, Zach Bond? X would equal what?
7.
Perfect. And what would this one say?
X would equal -1.
Perfect. Are those the same answers Lindsay got when she factored? Of course they are, right? You're always going to get the same answers. You're just doing it a different way. Raise your hand if now that we've done it, that process looks familiar to you. You may not be able to do it yet quite by yourself, but you've seen that before. Good. Good, good, good. Okay, where am I? All right, let's look at the next one. Trey, you doing all right back there? Okay. Thinking we need to do some jumping jacks or something, get our blood flowing. Directions say complete the square. Livia, how would you start this if the directions say complete the square?
Add 2 over.
Perfect, beautiful. Step 1, complete. Add the 2 over. Nicely, nicely done. Claire,
Plus
8 divided, so she's figuring out what she needs to add to both sides. So you said 8 divided by 2, 8 divided by 2, which is 4, squared is 16. Google, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Now, we did that, so why? What's the next step? Why did we just do that? So that this would be this. Jordan, can you tell me what's inside the parentheses here? What would be the perfect square that we just created?
X plus 4.
X plus 4 equals 18. Katie O'Neill, what's the next step?
E squared over both sides.
And when I do that, Katie, what will I be left with?
X plus 4 equals,
Well, first of all, let's make sure we say plus or minus, and let's just, for now, let's just say the square root of 18. Is that okay with everybody? Now, what Katie's doing here is she was trying to do it all in her head. She's saying, wait a minute, 18, that's not a perfect square, but I think it simplifies. How does root 18 simplify? How does that break down? John?
2 and 9, and then 3 and 2.
So we've got 2 3s.
2 square root 3,
Watch it the other way around.
or 3 square root 3.
So we have x plus 4 equals plus or minus 3 root 2. Square root of 18. And then we need to move the 4 over, so x equals negative 4 plus or minus 3 root 2. You can split that up if you want. I think this is wasted writing, but if you want to split it up so you can see 2 separate answers, that's okay. I just like to leave it together. They don't add, I can't do anything with them, so I just write it this way. What do you think? Think you're good? Or we're gonna do one more example, because there's one more tricky little piece to it. Take a look at equation C. What is different about equation C? There's a number in front of the x squared. All right, now listen carefully. When you complete the square, you cannot have a number in front of the x squared. Okay? That cannot be there. So what are we going to have to do before we do anything else? We're going to divide everything by 2. So divide, 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 divide. Everything gets divided by 2. So now I have my plain x squared. Zach?
Can't you multiply the 2 to the 4, and then like, I guess not, my bad.
Yeah. Our job is to get rid of that 2, Zach, because we cannot do the problem with it there. So the only way to get it out of the problem completely is to divide it out. Now, could I do other things with it, Zach? Absolutely, but that wouldn't get rid of it. I need to get rid of it. Miss Deere, Next step. Now I've gotten rid of the 2. Now what? Move this 2 over now. Mr. Devine, I'm going to complete the square now. What am I going to add to both sides? 25. And how did you get that?
Half of 10, that's for
Very good. Could you hear him? Half of 10 is 5. Squared is 25. So we add that to both sides. Perfect. Cole, this had better be a perfect square. What perfect square? When I say that, I mean this. What perfect square would it be? X minus 5 equals 23. All right. Next step, Lexi. Square root both sides. So I would have x minus 5 equals what? Plus or minus the square root of 23. So x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 23. Beautifully done. I gave a quiz last period. And one of the questions on the quiz was this. If completing the square, and I'm going to abbreviate, what number should be added to both sides? And then I gave them the equation, 2x squared minus 8x plus 3 equals 0. So I didn't ask them to complete the square. I just said, if you were going to complete the square, what number should be added to both sides? So like, we came up with 25. For this problem, what would it be for this one? Any thoughts on that?
2.
No. Why is it 4?
Because you have to divide by 2 first.
Very good. Very good. You guys are making my day. Very good. First, we would have to divide the equation by 2, right? Divide everything by 2. And then we'd move our 3/2 to the other side, and that would be yicky because it's a fraction, but I'm not actually doing the process. I'm just figuring out what would go here. Right? Half of 4 is 2, squared is 4. So if you said 4, you were exactly right. Tonight's homework is back in P5. Follow the directions. Okay? Do what the directions say in P5. Nathaniel, would you turn that off and hand it to me, please? Thank you.
You're welcome.